Take a couple more deep breaths and return as you will your attention to this sanctuary. I will always have this image in my heart and in my mind. After Katrina, I went down maybe a month later and served with the Red Cross in Baton Rouge, in the River Center, where still there were a couple thousand people left in the center. But when my tour of duty ended, I had a rental car. I loaded it up with supplies from the Red Cross and other sources, and drove to Waveland, Mississippi, on the coast, where it was completely devastated. There was a gas station that still had its roof, and there was a pile higher than, as far as my arms can reach, bigger, of things that people had dropped off, clothes and whatnot, just threw them there. And I, in my car, drove to a site where there was a distribution center, makeshift, and delivered the materials in the name both of the Red Cross and the UU congregation in Baton Rouge, which contributed a lot of money so that I could buy things like packages of diapers, things that I didn't have from the Red Cross. And I gave it to the fellow who was in charge, and he was clearly from an evangelical Christian group, and I told him where I was coming from, the Red Cross and the UU congregation in Baton Rouge, and he said, well, we'll tell them it's from the Red Cross. I'll never forget that image of the woman in front of her house, and her house from the street was way back beyond maybe the office. But she had a big front lawn area, or it was a front lawn area, and a few trees that were still left, and some bushes. And there were things strewn all over. And it looked almost like Christmas decoration in a way. Things hanging from the trees, white pieces of cloth, different colors of cloth, all over. And back at the house, which was a big house at one point, with big pillars. You know, you can imagine like Southern plantation style, was this woman on the step, just like this, with her apron and her scarf. And tears, you could tell she was alone and looking at the material world that she now faced. I will never forget that image. Somebody gave me a tour of the area so I could see what happened in Waveland. And it was that kind of picture of houses and yards turned over. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, before we moved to New York City, till I was 7, we lived in a small town. We had a little backyard. And my mother would tell me, eat what's on your plate. There are children starving in China. Yes. I can tell. Some of us are of that generation. I think the population changes year by year, or generation by generation. I remember going in the backyard and taking some little shovel. It must have been a little kid's spade. And I didn't like what was being served, so I went out back. You know what I did. I started digging to see if I could find the people in China who wanted my food that I didn't want. And I probably got about 4 inches, maybe 5. And I looked. I didn't see anybody. Now, it would be nice if I could add to the story that I actually took the food and put it in anyway and buried it in case somebody came up for it. I didn't do that. I just took the dirt and threw it back on the hole that I'd dug. We have, most of us, if not all of us in this room, much that we can cite that we are grateful for in our lives, yes? We are particularly fortunate, generally speaking. Some of us have health problems. Some of us have very serious health problems. Some of our loved ones do. Some of us face financial struggles. Some of us feel alone in the world and may be, except for this community, alone in the world. Generally, we have much that we are grateful for in the way of things, people to some degree, the places where we live in a beautiful place. And so it's natural that we would feel gratitude. How many of you had a Thanksgiving where you shared what you're grateful for at all? Yeah, some of you did. How many of you went out to a restaurant? Come on. That's okay. It's good. It's good. It's fine. How many of you went to friends or family? Yeah, a lot of people. Okay, good. So that's a good sign. You had people and places to be on the day that's called Thanksgiving. You know, a lot of people study gratitude. Scientists, social scientists, biologists, chemists, anybody who can get a grant. No, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that. Grants are hard to come by these days, unless you're studying something on the edges. Do you think you're a grateful person? Sometimes I am in touch with my gratitude. When I went to Nicaragua some years back for the first time, I stayed with a family that didn't have running water. Do you know, to this day, every time I turn on a faucet, every time, or I even think I'm going to go turn on a faucet, I remember how the woman of that family in that house, such as it was, a pretty tenuous little building, would get up at 3 in the morning to quickly fill every pot, every cup, every barrel, everything she could from a pipeline that was set up from water siphoned off the city. They lived on the edge of Managua. For about half an hour, the water would come shooting through. She'd do her best to get as much water in containers as she could, and then the water would stop, and she could go back to bed every single day. I have a lovely glass of water up here that Jody got me. Jody, you didn't have to go siphoning water at 3 in the morning for this, did you? No. I'm grateful. Well, so you all know this. Gratitude has been studied, and there are people who say that if you have a spirit of gratitude, it's good for your health. It's good for your attitude. It's good for how you are in the world. It's good for the people around you. Some people say that, and that might be true. It could be genetic. You know, they're studying genes, of which there are a zillion. Okay, that's not an actual number, but you get the idea. Many, many genes, and they've identified at least a couple that might have something to do with people's tendency toward gratitude. This is fascinating stuff, and someday perhaps will be useful in some sense. So we can at least say, well, there's some kind of biological and chemical and so on connection, nature. And then there's the nurture component. How does that impact our tendency toward gratitude? All of this is good. The problem becomes a couple places. One is when we don't practice gratitude because we lose sight. We lose sight of being grateful, for one thing. The other thing is that we sometimes think other people should jump to gratitude when they're not there yet. That woman, you see, I would not say to that woman, and you would not say to that woman, be grateful that you're alive. But there are people who would, and I don't want to, they have their rationale for that, but it's not the time when she's standing there in this shocked posture. What we can do is accompany someone in that situation. Like folks who are doing up now in the fire zone, and as I did to some extent for a week after the Santa Rosa fires. You can stand with people as they search through their things. But sometimes we jump ahead because we're not comfortable, and we think we have to fix it. And we want people to jump into gratitude when it's really not the time. You can be grateful they're alive. You can be grateful that one of their keepsakes made it. And if they express gratitude for that, great. But it's kind of like when a woman tries to get pregnant, and she doesn't, or if she does and she has a miscarriage, which I know some of you have endured, and somebody wants to fix it, and so the first thing they say is what? You can adopt. We mean well when we do these things, but we're jumping, and we put pressure on people to be grateful. And I just want us to acknowledge that gratitude has its moment, its time, and its place. So that's one thing. We don't need to rush in and try to rescue someone's pain, someone out of their pain, by being premature with our solution. Oh, you can just adopt. It's not the same thing to that woman in that moment. It's not ever going to be the same thing. You don't have to be grateful that you're a victim of a fire. When I did work in AIDS for over 15 years, there were people who would say, oh, well, there's a silver lining. Well, okay. And you know, the truth is that for some people, I know, that for some people, finding out they were HIV positive, they got a positive test result, was a kind of wake-up call for them. They would express, some people, that they needed to take a look at how they were living their lives and what they valued in their lives. But it wasn't my job to say they should be grateful for a silver lining that they themselves weren't in touch with at all. Or those religionists who were doing testing who would do things like say, your test result is positive now, and pull out a Bible and say, get on your knees and ask God for forgiveness. Be grateful that God is so loving and would forgive you. Gratitude is a wonderful thing. Maybe it has healing factors to it. Maybe it helps us live a better life in some sense. Yes, I think so. When I'm on it, I wake up in the morning and tell myself I'm grateful for another day. To maybe do some things that I can do. Maybe make up for some of the things I did that maybe weren't so great. Maybe make amends somewhere. When I'm on my game, as it were, or when I turn on a faucet. We all have the capacity to be grateful, but what's the time and what's the way, and how do we express it in the world? Cicero said that gratitude is the mother of all virtues, that in order to be able to exercise other virtues, live into other virtues, gratitude is sort of the foundation, the mother of them all. I don't know. A lot of people picked up on what Cicero said. A lot of people do. Maybe it is. Maybe it's something that we need to consider more carefully. Not only for practicing gratitude, but what we're grateful for. Dr. Neil Burton says that with all the talk there is about gratitude, and you know there are lots of books, you know this, lots of best-selling books about gratitude, 52 weeks a year, how to be grateful, and 24 hours a day, how to be grateful, all that. And there are tidbits in there that are fine and dandy, but what Dr. Burton says is that ultimately, being grateful for nothing is the most evolved gratitude of all. And so I look at that and I say, what's up with that? Being grateful for, well, okay, yeah, I don't really like to dwell in gratitude for things too much. I mean, in the moment, oh, thank you for the gift. But it's not the same thing as, on a deeper level, being grateful for life itself. Grateful for each breath. That is fundamental. And it takes me, and I think about that, be grateful for nothing. And so what I do with that is I say, I am grateful for my breath at one end and for all of existence at the other end. And everything else, and everyone else, and every other place, and all that. Not to discount it, but to get in touch with this business of being grateful for nothing. That's as close as I can get. I'm grateful that I have this moment and this breath. And I'm grateful for the whole of the universe. It's sort of like a puzzle. And on the edges, on the boundaries of the puzzle are these things. Gratitude for my breath, existence, I'm not doing the sign of the cross. Get over it. I know you people. I'm going to offer you this reading before I conclude. It's another doctor, Amit Sood. Can gratitude eliminate suffering? And he writes, gratitude comes with different depths. At one pole are people who don't know how to be grateful. They plunder the world, forever seeking more. They feel supremely entitled, and they harbor callous disregard for other people. A bit more awake are those who employ gratitude to thwart guilt. They use gratitude as a temporary escape into virtue, so they don't feel so selfish in their hedonistic drive. Gratitude in them is an occasional companion, often contingent on something big and special happening, and generally doesn't translate into pro-social actions. Next are people who are grateful for the small and simple. They are aware that what they receive is a collective effort of millions. Grateful thoughts visit their mind on most days and translate into occasional actions geared to help the world. They wish the whole world to be happy and are even willing to make a personal sacrifice for the benefit of others. Further advanced are people who have gratitude as their constant companion. They are content. They have a very low threshold for happiness. Their personal needs are small. Their thoughts predominantly pro-social, focused on others. They still wish to acquire, but only so they can give more. Their gratitude doesn't lead to inaction. It actually plugs energy leakage. Finally, are people who are grateful even for adversities. They live in a state of surrender. Every experience to them is a meaningful gift. They have transcended the duality of good and bad. These are not dispassionate, apathetic people. Quite the contrary. Gratitude powers their passion and engagement. They wake up each day to create a more hopeful, happier, and kinder world. The day the majority of the inhabitants of our world live in the constant company of gratitude, even amid adversity, will be the day we will have eliminated suffering. I don't know about you. I'm definitely not in that most evolved category. I'm just not. I'm not even sure I can begin to aspire to that. I have a long way to go. We have to think about, though, what it is that we put out into the world. As individuals, as a community, as a society, what do we export to Nicaragua where they don't have running water? Electronics, TV sets, computers, cell phones, rice that they produce themselves just fine, but no, ours is better. We have to think about, as individuals, what do we export to one another? How do we look to one another in gratitude, in hope, in love, grateful for one another? It's a practice. And I invite us all into it again and again. I'm talking to me too. Practicing gratitude day by day. Some people talk about making lists of gratitude in the morning and lists at night. That's fine. Whatever it takes, a practice of gratitude and outwardly focused. I'm grateful for my breath and my friends in this congregation. I am grateful for all of you.